In this video, we are diving into 10 chilling cults that are still active today, quietly pulling strings, recruiting followers, and carrying out their dark agendas. You won't believe who's still out there. And I'm your host, Alina. Let's begin. Cults. They rise, they fall, but some never really go away. While not all cults are inherently dangerous, many have led their followers down dark paths, costing their free will, their happiness, and even their lives. What if the most dangerous cult didn't disappear? What if they just went underground? The Rajneesh Movement. Yeah. The one behind that Netflix doc you probably binge-watched wasn't just a weird footnote in spiritual history. It was one of the most controversial, unsettling cults of the 20th century. It all started with Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho. By the late 60s, he had built a movement that looked like spiritual liberation on the outside, but inside it was something much darker. Followers moved into secluded communes, families were split apart, and kids were denied formal education. It's unsettling to imagine people giving up their lives for this, and yet thousands did. When things got too intense in India, the movement packed up and headed to rural Oregon, and that's where things went completely off the rails. We are talking the largest wiretapping operation in US history, massive immigration fraud, and worst of all, the 1984 Salmonella attack, where Rajneesh's followers poisoned salad bars in local restaurants, sickening over 700 people. It still blows my mind that this actually happened, and that most people barely talk about it. Eventually, the law caught up. Rajneesh was convicted and deported, and after his death in 1990, the movement mostly fizzled out. But here's the thing, it didn't completely disappear. There are still small pockets of followers out there, in the US, Europe, and the UK, keeping his teachings alive. Creepy? Definitely. Forgotten? Not if I can help it. The Order of the Solar Temple, and this one really gets under my skin. It's one of the most infamous modern cults, wrapped in layers of secrecy, manipulation, and straight-up tragedy. Founded in 1984 by Luc Jouret and Joseph D. Mambro in Geneva, Switzerland, the group went by a few lofty names, like the International Order of Chivalry Solar Tradition and the Hermetica Fraternitas Templi Universali. Sounds fancy, right? But don't be fooled, it was all smoke and mirrors. They blended New Age mysticism, Freemason-style rituals, and some truly bizarre theatrics to reel people in. And it worked. At its peak, the order had lodges all over the world, complete with dramatic ceremonies that probably felt more like a cult-themed stage show rather than spiritual enlightenment. Their core belief was that the world was heading toward an apocalyptic collapse, of course, sometime in the mid-90s. And, spoiler alert, the world didn't end. But the fallout from that failed prophecy was terrifying. And here's where things take a dark turn. In 1994 and 1995, a series of mass murders and suicides took place across France, Switzerland, and Canada. Dozens of lives were lost, some willingly, some not. It's terrifying how deeply people can be manipulated when they think they are part of a divine mission. After that, the group's influence nosedived, as surviving members realized the so-called enlightenment they'd been promised was really just a death cult in disguise. And yet, the order isn't completely gone. Some estimates say there are still between 150 to 500 members, keeping the flame alive, quietly operating in the shadows. I don't know about you, but the idea that this group, after everything, is still active, that's not just disturbing, it's haunting. Aleph, originally known as AUM Shinrikyo, might sound like something out of a dystopian novel, but this is very real, very dark history. Founded in 1987 by a man named Shoko Asahara, it started as a mix of Eastern spiritual teachings, Tibetan, Theravada, and his own bizarre interpretations, meant to offer enlightenment through intense psychic training. Honestly, at first glance, it probably seemed like just another spiritual group for people searching for something deeper. In 1995, AUM Shinrikyo shocked the world with one of the most horrific domestic terror attacks in Japanese history. The Tokyo subway sarin gas attack. 13 people were gone, thousands were injured, and the public's sense of safety was shattered. This wasn't just some fringe group anymore. It was a lethal cult led by a man who claimed to be a divine savior. What's even more disturbing is how Asahara denied everything, even going so far as to broadcast his innocence from Russia. But by 2000, there was no hiding. The group's new leaders confirmed his involvement in multiple crimes, including the subway attack. In an attempt to distance themselves from the blood-stained past, they rebranded the group as Aleph. But the damage was done. Justice finally caught up with Asahara and 6 of his top followers in 2018. They were executed after exhausting all appeals. That should have been the end of it, right? Not quite. In 2019, an AUM sympathizer named Kazuhiro Kusakabe drove a van into a busy street in Harajuku, claiming it was revenge for those executions. It was like the cult's twisted ideology just wouldn't die. Today, Aleph still exists. It keeps a much lower profile, but it still operates in Japan. Quiet, careful, and clinging to the remnants of a horrifying legacy. The 12 Tribes is one of those groups that really blurs the line between religious movement and full-blown cult. Honestly, the more you dig, the darker it gets. We're talking allegations of abuse, kidnapping, and yes, even murder, back in its peak years. It all started in 1972 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, when a guy named Gene Spriggs, who, fun fact, or creepy fact, used to be a carnival barker and a high school guidance counselor, decided he was going to bring back what he believed was the purest form of Christianity. Under Spriggs' leadership, the group exploded. At one point, they had over 3,000 followers living in tight-knit, isolated communities around the world. And Spriggs, he wasn't just a leader, he was the leader. Charismatic, controlling, and central to everything they did. But in 2021, Spriggs died at the age of 86. And here's where things get interesting. He didn't name a successor. No one to take over, no final prophecy. Just silence. And that silence left the 12 tribes kind of adrift. Not gone, but definitely not the force they used to be. Still, even though they faded from the spotlight, the group isn't gone. They're still out there, operating quietly in the background. No headlines, no scandals, at least not recently. Just this eerie sense that something is still brewing beneath the surface. And honestly, this might be the scariest part. But actually, if you're still watching, thank you for sticking around. And subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed yet, so you don't miss my next video. Let me tell you about one of the most unsettling cults you've probably never heard enough about, the Family International. It started back in 1968 in Huntington Beach in California, founded by a man named David Burke. At first, it seemed like just another Christian youth group called Teens for Christ, but it didn't take long for things to take a seriously dark turn. The group quickly morphed into what became known as the Children of God. One thing that always raises red flags for me: frequent name changes. This group has rebranded more times than a sketchy startup. By 1978, they were calling themselves the Family of Love, then just the Family, and now the Family International. Yeah, that many name changes usually means that someone is trying to outrun their nasty reputation. And trust me, their reputation was earned. While they preached messages about love and faith, behind closed doors, it was a very different story. We are talking serious allegations: child actual abuse, physical abuse, and manipulation of the vulnerable. The most shocking part: something called flirty fishing. Yes, you heard that right. Berg encouraged women in a group to literally use sex as a recruitment tool. It's as disturbing as it sounds. Berg didn't just mess with people's sex lives, he discouraged followers from getting normal jobs or even sending their kids to school. Instead, everyone lived communally, prepping for an apocalypse that, spoiler alert, never actually arrived. Can you imagine growing up like that? No school, no privacy, no freedom, just this looming manufactured fear that the world was ending. Now, David Berg died in the 90s, and with him a lot of the media attention faded. But here's the kicker: the Family International is still active. They now operate under something called the Love Charter, a governing document that supposedly outlines the rights and responsibilities of members. But let's be real, after everything that's come out about this group, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Even if they've toned things down, the scars of their past run deep. And for those who lived through it, the damage is already done. In 1978, a man named Hulon Mitchell Jr. broke away from the Nation of Islam, not because it was too radical, but because in his mind it wasn't radical enough. That alone should tell you something. He rebranded himself as Yahweh ben Yahweh, literally translating to God, Son of God. And in 1979, he launched his own movement, the Nation of Yahweh. On the surface, it was a religious group rooted in Black identity, built around the belief that African Americans are true Israelites who should eventually return to Israel. But here's the twist: this wasn't just about spiritual awakening. To his followers, Yahweh ben Yahweh wasn't just a teacher. He was the Messiah, the actual Son of God. And that's where things start getting intense. At its height, the Nation of Yahweh had all the hallmarks of power. A fleet of Greyhound buses, even Rolls-Royce cars rolling through the streets. To outsiders, it might have looked like a religious success story. But if you've been watching my channel for a while, you already know when things seem too perfect on the outside, that usually means something's very wrong underneath. And sure enough, behind the polished image was a much darker truth. The feds eventually came knocking. Yahweh ben Yahweh was indicted for racketeering and extortion, and later convicted for conspiracy to commit murder. He served time, got out, and died in 2007, but not before the movement nearly collapsed under the weight of its own secrets. And yet, here's the creepiest part: it never fully died. Even now, there are still loyal followers who believe he was the true Messiah, still preaching, still recruiting, still out there. It's one of those stories that make you wonder, how far can belief go before it becomes too dangerous? The LaRouche Movement is one of the strange political currents that refuses to disappear, no matter how bizarre or outdated it may seem. It all started back in the late 1960s, spun out of the radical left, but by the mid-1970s, it had veered hard into far-right territory. And at the center of it all was Lyndon LaRouche, a man who ran for US president 8 times and never once came close to winning. What really fascinates and unsettles me about this movement is how tightly controlled it was. The National Caucus of Labor Committees operated almost like a political cult. Members were kept on punishing schedules, completely immersed in LaRouche's ever-shifting ideology. That man was a chameleon, constantly rebranding his views to suit whatever agenda he was facing at the time. And he didn't just flirt with conspiracy theories. He practically helped invent the modern playbook. One of the darkest moments came in 1973 when LaRouche ordered something called Operation Mop Up. And no, that's not a metaphor. He literally told his followers to physically assault members of the opposite party. This led to nearly 40 violent confrontations, arrests, injuries, you name it. It's wild to think a political group could be that openly aggressive and still fly under the radar for so long. LaRouche died in 2019, but the movement never truly disappeared. It just faded from mainstream attention. Every now and then, though, you'll see signs of it pop up. Odd campaign flyers, strange candidates, and people pushing conspiracy-laced rhetoric that sounds eerily familiar. So yeah, LaRouche movement might seem like a relic of the past, but in reality it's still lingering in the shadows. And honestly, that should make us all a little uneasy. The Remnant Fellowship isn't just a church. It's a full-blown movement that started in Brentwood, Tennessee, and somehow managed to turn weight loss into a spiritual mission. Yep, you heard that right. Losing weight for God. It was founded by Gwen Lara, a woman known for her towering blonde hair and incredibly thin frame. She preached that if you were craving food, you needed more prayer, not more calories. To her, holiness meant self-denial. Your hunger, that was temptation. Your fridge, basically the devil. But here's where things start to really spiral. This wasn't just a quirky diet meets religion situation. Gwen Lara had serious control over her followers, way beyond what they ate. She got involved in their marriages, their money, their parenting, even custody battles. You had to cut ties with the outside world and keep smiling, no matter how much you were hurting inside. Joy, beauty, perfection. That was the image, even if it was all a mask. Then came May 29, 2021. A private plane carrying Gwen, her husband Joe, and 5 other top leaders from the church crashed just outside Smyrna, Tennessee. In an instant, the face and the power of the movement was gone. A lot of people thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. Even without its leader, the Remnant Fellowship is still very much alive. Her most loyal followers are keeping the flame burning, clinging to her teachings like gospel. Heaven's Gate, an American religious movement that began in 1974, was founded by Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, who adopted the names T and Do within their group. Their unusual journey started in 1972 when they met and bonded over a shared longing for spiritual answers. They came to believe they were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation, a belief that became the cornerstone, what would eventually grow into a movement with several hundred followers by the mid-1970s. I find it fascinating and honestly a bit unsettling how two people's search for meaning can evolve into something so all-consuming, not just for themselves but for others too. By 1976, the group stopped recruiting and shifted to a more secluded monastic way of life, cutting ties with the outside world in pursuit of what they saw as a higher calling. At the heart of Heaven's Gate was a belief that human beings could transcend their earthly forms and become immortal extraterrestrial beings. This concept of reaching the next level beyond humanity is both wildly imaginative and haunting, especially knowing where it all ultimately led. Tragically, their convictions ended in a largest mass suicide in American history, claiming 39 lives in 1997. Although Heaven's Gate is no longer active in a traditional sense, its legacy is still around. Two individuals continue to maintain the group's website, preserving its teachings and making sure its ideology remains accessible, like a digital echo from the past, still reaching out to anyone curious enough to click through. The Branch Davidians, a religious movement rooted in apocalyptic beliefs, were officially founded in 1955 by Benjamin Rodden. They considered themselves the spiritual successors to the General Association of Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, which Victor Hotov had established 2 decades earlier in 1935. In 1983, the group was taken over by David Koresh, born Vernon Howell, a man whose name would soon be etched into the darker chapters of American history. Koresh was undeniably charismatic but also deeply manipulative. Under his leadership, the Branch Davidians morphed from a religious sect into what many would describe as a cult, one dominated by absolute control, fear, and disturbing practices. It's chilling how easily a single figure can twist spiritual longing into something so destructive. By the early 1990s, law enforcement agencies began to take serious notice. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms suspected the Branch Davidians of illegally modifying firearms, turning semi-automatic rifles into fully automated weapons. To investigate, the ITF planted undercover agents, posing as college students within the group. But Koresh was no fool. He sensed the deception and was always just ahead of their efforts. That cat and mouse game only heightened the tension. Then came 1993. What unfolded was one of the most harrowing standoffs in American history. A 51-day siege involving the FBI, the ATF, and Branch Davidians. The standoff ended in a fiery, tragic climax. 76 Branch Davidians, including Koresh himself, lost their lives. 4 ATF agents were also gone, and 16 more were wounded. The entire ordeal felt like a national trauma, an explosive mix of fanatism, government force, and miscommunication. And yet, what surprises many is that the movement didn't die with Koresh. It still lingers in Waco, Texas, like a ghost of its past. And I can't help but wonder, what draws people back into belief systems so marred by violence and tragedy? The legacy of the Branch Davidians remains a haunting reminder of what happens when faith, power, and paranoia collide. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here. And I'll see you there. Bye!